We leven in een tijd van grote technologische veranderingen. En met het oog op morgen gaan we de ontwikkelingen op dat terrein de komende tijd met aandacht volgen. En ook proberen te duiden wat voor impact die hebben op ons dagelijks leven. En we doen dat met filosoof en publicist Hans Schnitzler. Hij schreef onder meer het boek Het Digitale Proletariaat over de schaduwzijde van de digitalisering en de mensen die niet mee kunnen. Goedenavond opnieuw, meneer Schnitzler.
Goedenavond.
U denkt dat 2019 het nieuwe jaar een belangrijk jaar wordt in de strijd om de data.
Ja.
Vanwaar die voorspelling?
Nou ja, wat je ziet is eigenlijk 2018 was een beetje het jaar waarin de reputatie van de grote tech-giganten zo'n beetje aan diggelen is gegaan. Facebook, Google. En het zal wel eens heel goed kunnen dat het jaar 2019 inderdaad de strijd om onze data werkelijk gevoerd gaat worden. Wat je ziet, er zijn allerlei initiatieven op het niveau van wetgeving die eigenlijk op uit zijn om de dataverzamelwoede van de tech-giganten een beetje aan banden te leggen. Zo zie je bijvoorbeeld dat Frankrijk heeft net de eerste boete uitgedeeld aan Google in verband met de nieuwe privacywet die eind vorig jaar is ingegaan. Ook in Duitsland worden er maatregelen getroffen. In de Verenigde Staten is er zelfs een hele bundeling van groeperingen, privacywaakhonderen, die proberen ervoor te gaan zorgen dat Facebook zelfs opgedeeld gaat worden. En misschien nog interessanter, ook van binnenuit, vanuit de tech-industrie zelf. Bekend voorbeeld, Tim Berners-Lee, dat is eigenlijk de geestelijk vader van het wereldwijde web, die onlangs heeft gezegd van ik ga een soort digitale kluis bouwen, waarbij onze gegevens daar dus veilig opgeborgen zijn en dat wij als consumenten, als burgers, zelf kunnen bepalen wie er met welke gegevens vandoor gaan. Dus er staat heel wat te gebeuren.
Maar in Nederland hoor je daar nog weinig over van dat soort initiatieven.
Nou, in Nederland gebeurt er ook wel het een en ander. Er is zelfs een Datavakbond opgericht enige tijd geleden, ook met de inzet om mensen te mobiliseren, om stem te laten horen. En je ziet natuurlijk ook het Waag Society, Marleen Sticker is druk bezig. Dus er gebeurt ook hier echt wel het een en ander. En ja, wat je ziet is dat nadat die reputaties toch wel echt naar beneden zijn gegaan van dit soort bedrijven, dat de actiebereidheid best wel groot is en dat er ook een soort nieuw elan weer is onder mensen die met dit onderwerp bezig zijn en het gevoel hebben van we kunnen weer iets van het terrein terug gaan pakken. Ja.
De Amerikaanse wetenschapper Shoshana Zuboff heeft net een behoorlijk lijvig boek geschreven, waarin ze die techreus uit Silicon Valley beschuldigt van eigenlijk een nieuw soort kapitalisme. Ze noemt het observatiekapitalisme. Ja. Rijk worden door het gedrag van burgers te observeren, ook te voorspellen en dan weer door te verkopen aan adverteerders. Ja. Is dat een goede analyse? Ja, ik vind haar analyse, het is een belangrijk boek. Er is reikhalzend ook naar uitgekeken in kringen die zich met dit onderwerp bezighouden. En wat zij eigenlijk als eerste doet, het is ook niet voor niets dat haar boek al vergeleken wordt met Piketty, Kapitaal in de 21e eeuw, is voor het eerst een hele gedetailleerde analyse geven van hoe dat surveillance-kapitalisme, zoals zij dat noemt, hoe dat zich heeft kunnen vormen. En ze heeft enorm veel bronnen aangehaald, 7 jaar daarmee bezig geweest. En inderdaad, wat ze laat zien, en dat is het punt wat ze wil maken, dat we eigenlijk niet goed doorhebben dat we in een hele nieuwe constellatie zitten. Een hele nieuw economisch paradigma waarin het inderdaad draait om niet alleen ons gedrag in kaart te brengen en ons gedrag te gaan voorspellen, maar waar ook steeds meer ons gedrag gestuurd gaat worden. En dat is een analyse die ik wel deel, die ik eigenlijk zelf ook wel in het digitale proletariaat heb getrokken. Maar wat zij doet is zo grondig en zo verontrustend dat het echt een boek is waar iedereen kennis van zou moeten nemen. Ze werkt eigenlijk het thema kennis is macht opnieuw uit, hè? Ja, dat zou je wel kunnen stellen. En wat zij dus stelt is dat wie bepaalt wat kennis is, wie bepaalt hoe de kennis verdeeld wordt. En wat zij laat zien is dat we dat eigenlijk gewoon uit handen hebben gegeven aan een paar van die grote techmonopolies. Hoe heeft dat kunnen gebeuren? Ja, dat is natuurlijk een ontwikkeling die vrij natuurlijk gegaan is en die eigenlijk samenhangt met, in haar analyse ook, een soort inherente dynamiek binnen het kapitalisme zelf. Wat je ziet is dat kapitalisme altijd op zoek is naar nieuwe wingebieden. Oorspronkelijk waren het natuurlijk concrete diensten en producten waar winst op werden gegenereerd. Toen kwam de nadruk wat op speculatie te liggen. En langzaam maar zeker heeft men het terrein, het domein van de menselijke psyche ontdekt. Onze verlangens, onze wensen, onze dromen en gedachten. En wat je ziet is dat met name Google, dat noemt zij ook het moederschip van deze nieuwe economische
economische werkelijkheid, die ontdekten op een gegeven moment wat ze met die data konden doen. En dan met name wat zij dan noemt het gedragssurplus. Dus er werd allerlei data werden verzameld. Die werden in eerste instantie vooral gebruikt om ons gemak te vergroten van de dienstverlening. Maar men ontdekte dat het genereerde niet genoeg geld. En men zag in één keer, we kunnen met die gedragspatronen, met die data, kunnen we gedrag heel goed gaan voorspellen. Ja, en dat bleek een goudmijn, waar Google langzaam maar zeker dat heeft omarmd. Ook door druk van natuurlijk de investeerders. En wat je ziet is dat die logica zich langzaam verspreid heeft naar Facebook, Amazon en naar allerlei andere industrieën.
Want bedrijven als Google en Facebook zijn eigenlijk heel idealistisch begonnen. Dat beschrijft Zuboff ook in haar boek. Wilde geen advertenties hebben, bijvoorbeeld. Nee, wanneer is de omslag gekomen?
Nou ja, dat zit dus rond die periode van 2000. Dan krijg je de dotcom-bubbel, die barst. Er komt enorm veel druk op die nieuwe start-ups. En ja, rond 2002, 2001 zie je inderdaad dat er ook bij Google, bij de oprichters van Google, een soort omslag plaatsvindt, dat te zien van nogmaals onder druk natuurlijk van het kapitaal. Dat ze zien van we moeten iets gaan doen. En we moeten met die enorme hoeveelheid data gaan kijken wat we daar, hoe we dat nog verder kunnen uitmunten in feite. Dus het zit ergens rond die periode 2000-2001.
Ja. Vandaar dat ik de hele tijd van die advertenties krijg over vakanties in Australië, Brazilië. En ooit iets aangeklikt en dan blijven ze denken van we kunnen die man naartoe verleiden naar Australië.
Het is een soort stalken. Je komt er niet meer onderuit. Nou kan je nog van zeggen van advertenties, die klik ik weg. Maar wat er natuurlijk steeds meer gebeurt is dat ze ook juist door gaan krijgen wanneer je bijvoorbeeld wat kwetsbaar bent. Hè. Er is duidelijk gebleken ook bij Facebook dat ze nieuwe technologie hebben ontwikkeld waarbij ze kunnen zien bepaalde groepen, maar ook zelfs op het niveau van individuen, van wat speelt er op een bepaald moment, wat voor emoties spelen er, bijvoorbeeld op basis van wat je op Facebook liked of wat je erop zet. En dat zijn de momenten dat ze dan ook heel specifiek je gedrag kunnen gaan nudgen en gaan sturen. En dat gaat over reclames, maar het gaat natuurlijk ook over politiek. Het gaat ook over de manier waarop mensen keuzes maken. En zoals we hebben gezien bij de Brexit, onder andere Amerikaanse verkiezingen, is dat het mogelijk is om mensen net eventjes het juiste duwtje op het juiste moment te geven, waardoor ze op A of op B gaan stemmen.
En wat helpt er nou tegen? Ik bedoel, een heleboel mensen hebben na dat schandaal rond Cambridge Analytica zijn gestopt met Facebook. Maar we zijn toch allemaal verslaafd, hè?
Ja, dat is natuurlijk uiteindelijk ook het verhaal. Het wordt ook wel eens een verslavingsindustrie genoemd. Maar goed, wat Zuboff ook aangeeft, het zit op een veel fundamenteler niveau. En we moeten eigenlijk gaan zien dat datahandel in feite een vorm van mensenhandel is. En volgens mij hebben we de slavernij in het Westen al een tijdje geleden afgeschaft. Dus het gaat erom dat we echt dat systeem gaan aanpakken. En dat is ook waar zij toe oproept. Maar eerst moeten we duidelijk zien waar we nou eigenlijk in zitten. En vervolgens zal het toch echt neer moeten komen op regelgeving, op het ingrijpen door overheden. Want we hebben een sociaal contract afgesloten met onze overheden. We hebben een deel van onze soevereiniteit weggegeven. Denk aan het monopolie op geweld, in ruil voor bescherming van onze integriteit. Nou, die wordt met voeten getreden. Dus het is de heilige plicht van overheden om hier in te grijpen. En het ziet er nou uit dat daar nu het een en ander aan beweging in komt. Ja.
Dat wordt de grote strijd in 2019.
Dat denk ik wel.
Data. Ja. Hans Nietsler, opnieuw bedankt.
Graag gedaan.
So, the first thing I want to say is, sometimes people are reluctant to date themselves, but in this instance, I think I shall do. And say that I first started studying the digital and its effect on organizations and work and society in the year 1978. And it was pretty quickly in that effort that I had an insight that really drove me through the following decades. And that insight was that information technology was always going to detonate a new kind of political conflict. Because information technology, unlike other technologies, produces information and the possibility of new knowledge. And new knowledge will always be a contested territory. And the way I would summarize the political conflicts over this contested territory is 3 questions. Who knows? Who decides who knows? and who decides who decides. These are the entangled dilemmas of knowledge, authority, and power. In the first part of my career, it was possible to study these dilemmas and how they affected one another and the contests over them in the confines of the workplace. And that's what I did. I was focused on the workplace and its implications for work and the managerial hierarchy and all of that. By the 21st century, that was becoming clearly an early phase of something much, much larger. Because now these same contests, who knows, who decides, who decides, who decides, are contests that every single one of us is entangled in. No longer confined by the boundaries of the workplace or of any institution. We are all users, and as users, we are all part of this new political conflict. In my view, this conflict shifts the social ordering of our society from a division of labor, characteristic of the 20th century, to a division of learning, which is ushered in with this productivity, this fecundity of the digital era, and this new production of knowledge. The division of learning in society. So obviously I'm taking a page from Durkheim here in a certain way, in the sense that Durkheim wrote about not only the division of labor, but the ways in which the division of labor could be disfigured, pathological, abnormal, controlled by elite power, and against the interests of a democratic society. In the past 20 years, we've seen the rise of something that I've come to call surveillance capitalism. And I regard surveillance capitalism now as having had a relatively free run for these last 2 decades. Relatively, in some countries more than others, but still relatively unimpeded by law. Relatively unimpeded by social resistance. In the book, I describe 16 explanations for this long, successful run of surveillance capitalism. Among them, of course, is the fact that it's surveillance capitalism, which is to say, from the start, it understood that it had to be shrouded in the social relations of the one-way mirror, ergo surveillance. That if it actually stepped up in front of us and looked us in the eye and said, "May I take your private experience, please? May I take your private experience as free, raw material, and may I render that private experience as behavioral data, please? And then may I use those behavioral data to make predictions, to combine it with my unique proprietary computational capabilities, artificial intelligence, machine intelligence, and with that to discern predictive patterns, and from those predictive patterns to fabricate prediction products about your behavior and others' behavior. May I do that, please? And then may I sell those prediction products to business customers with a commercial interest in understanding what you will do now, soon, and later, so that I can gather together surveillance revenues, and with that, tremendous profit earnings ratios, and with that, world historic accumulations of market capitalization. May I do that, please? Well, the answer would be no. And therefore, surveillance capitalism began from the start engineering, carefully, intentionally designing its methodologies to produce ignorance in its users, all of us. That ignorance has been the veil that has prevented us from carefully naming and understanding the fact that we are entrapped by an economic logic, not by technology, not by inevitability, not by a single corporation and its business model or its management practices, or for that matter, its management failures, but rather by a systematic, comprehensive new economic logic, the basis for a new economic order in which the methodology of surveillance is the key to claiming private human experience for a new kind of marketplace that is about us but is not for us. Knowledge that is from us but sold to others to further their ends and their commercial goals. I spent 7 years just on this book. There was a lot of time before that kind of figuring out some of the basics, but 7 years, more or less 7 days a week, all of those years to complete this book. And I did it for one reason. And John, of course, with his normal perspicacity, goes right to the heart of it. I wanted to name this. I felt that we hadn't yet named it. And that if we are to tame surveillance capitalism, if we are to tether it to our own best interests, if we are to tether it to the interests and values and principles of a democratic society, then that taming can only begin with naming. And so that has really been my effort to, some would say, perhaps too tediously, but some would say just right, to name the economic logic, its fundamental mechanisms, its economic imperatives, and then to extrapolate from these operations to their aims for society, the way in which society is brought into this lens as just another set of objects for extraction, prediction, influence, and control, and ultimately as more raw material for monetization in commercial markets. So, naming. I wanted to say that another sort of dimension that I've tried to address in the book is both the dimension of rights as they affect us as individuals and as they impinge upon the existential structure of our lives, but also the way in which so in this existential perspective, we find that we are eroding democracy and the democratic prospect from the inside out, because surveillance capitalism, ultimately through its competitive dynamics, is driven to find its most predictive behavioral data from actually intervening in the state of play, intervening in our behavior, and helping to shape and influence, tune and herd our behavior toward its commercial outcomes. And I offer that this is the basis for the commandeering the digital infrastructure largely built by surveillance capital, commandeering this infrastructure for a new global means of behavior modification that is a fundamental challenge to human autonomy, to our right to the future tense. And with this challenge, we find a kind of erosion of democracy from within, because although it has become a cliche, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about, my response to that is that if you have nothing to hide, you are nothing. That is to say that everything that makes us rich, worthwhile, and inner life, the inner resources from which we draw for moral courage, for autonomy, for self-determination, those inner resources are under siege when we live a life exposed to this new environment of stimulus response and reward and punishment, bought and paid for by surveillance revenues. But we also see democracy being eroded from without. And here we come back to the division of learning in society, because during these 20 years of more or less unimpeded growth, surveillance capitalism has garnered to itself an unprecedented asymmetry of knowledge. And I've thought about this very carefully for many years now, and I honestly do believe that this asymmetry of knowledge that has been created within this institution owned and operated by private capital must be unparalleled in the history of humanity. because they know everything about us and we know very little about them. Their knowledge is about us but not for us. These asymmetries are truly revolutionary. Power accrues to knowledge, and asymmetries of knowledge, such as have been established, also produce asymmetries of power, the likes of which the world has never seen. I've gone to great pains to try and conceptualize this power, distinguish it from totalitarianism, which I believe is a very important distinction, because this is not a power that aims to murder us. It's not a power that aims to kill us. It's not a power that aims to destroy or even own our souls. This is a power that simply wants to shape us and be adjacent to us. It's a power that wants free access to our private experience for its own ends. I call it instrumentarian power because it takes command of the instrumented milieu of the digital and turns us into instruments of its own commercial goals. Instrumentarian power doesn't care if we are happy, but it does want to make sure that it has access to the data that springs from our joy. It doesn't care if we are sad, but it does want to ensure that it has access to the data that leaches from our anguish. Instrumentarian power is remote. It operates in the terms of radical indifference, but nevertheless, it is everywhere and it is powerful and it produces its own signature of violence. Its endgame, its view of society in the future, is a view in which computation replaces politics, where there is no more room for democracy, for contest. There is no more society. There is simply the absolutism of computation's right answers. I wanted to end with my last 5 minutes by reading you a couple of paragraphs from this book. These are paragraphs that are dear to my heart, and you'll see why when I begin to read them. But one of my key motivations that I haven't mentioned yet is that I have 2 children who are both in their 20s, 23, 26. And just as I stay up at night worrying about their future in a world of climate havoc, I also have lost a lot of sleep. In fact, during these years of writing, it's been really hard to sleep. Thinking about if nature is what we have helped to destroy during the century of industrial capitalism's dominance, is it now human nature that is in the sights of a new surveillance capitalism? Is it human nature that will be disfigured by a new regime of instrumentarian power? Should we not gather in resistance? Should we not gather the resources of our democracies to finally draw a line and not allow this to stand? And so I wrote these paragraphs for my children and for all the people in this audience who are, in your 20s and 30s. And for the rest of you, I wrote it for your children and all the children. When I speak to my children or an audience of young people, I try to alert them to the contingent nature of the thing that has us by calling attention to ordinary values and expectations before surveillance capitalism began its campaign of psychic numbing. It is not okay to have to hide in your own life. It is not normal, I tell them. It is not okay to spend your lunchtime conversations comparing software that will camouflage you and protect you from continuous unwanted invasion. 5 trackers blocked, 4 trackers blocked, 59 trackers blocked, facial features scrambled, voice disguised. I tell them that the word search has meant a daring existential journey, not a finger tap to already existing answers. that friend is an embodied mystery that can only be forged face to face and heart to heart, and that recognition is the glimmer of homecoming we experience in our beloved's face, not facial recognition. I say that it is not okay to have our best instincts for connection and information exploited by a draconian quid pro quo that holds these goods hostage to the pervasive strip search of our lives. It is not okay for every move, emotion, utterance, and desire to be cataloged, manipulated, and then used to surreptitiously herd us through the future tense for the sake of someone else's profit. These things are brand new, I tell them. They are unprecedented. You should not take them for granted because they are not okay. If democracy is to be replenished in the coming decades, it is up to us to rekindle the sense of outrage and loss over what it is being taken from us. In this, I do not mean only our personal information. What is at stake here is the human expectation of sovereignty over one's own life and authorship of one's own experience. What is at stake is the inward experience from which we form the will to will and the public spaces to act on that will. What is at stake is the dominant principle of social ordering in an information civilization and our rights as individuals and societies to answer the questions, who knows, who decides, who decides, who decides. That surveillance capitalism has usurped so many of our rights in these domains is a scandalous abuse of digital capabilities and their once grand promise to democratize knowledge and meet our thwarted needs for effective life. Let there be a digital future, but let there be a human future first. Thank you.
Now, surveillance capitalism in its most basic form for me is one of a series of fixes that have evolved to, basically fight crises of accumulation within capitalism. Professor Zuboff quotes David Harvey talking about the spatial fix of globalization earlier in the book, and it's certainly true that this particular series of fixes, and it isn't just one, it's a multiple series of fixes that comes in at this point, and surveillance capitalism may be indeed one of another whole wider range of such fixes, aims to kind of commodify those areas of our lives that have so far remained uncommodified. It aims to commodify our thoughts, our behavior, our intimate relationships. It's a wonderful book that is not as big as Professor Zuboff's, but is still an incredibly worthwhile book by Jonathan Clary called 24/7, which some of you may have come across, which he looks at the way in which sleep remains one of the few frontiers of human experience that remains uncommodified by capitalism. Just as I was preparing these notes, I got told of several different Internet of Things devices that are now doing exactly this. Different watches and indeed a surveillance pillow that starts to turn our sleep into data. These last frontiers of human intimacy and privacy are vanishing day by day, minute by minute. And I agree also, very importantly, that this particular series of fixes for capitalism is not about labor. I think many of us in the academic community have made the mistake in the past of attributing all of this to a new kind of labor. Both Nick Cernacek and Shoshana Zuboff say that it is not labor. This is actually the movement of capitalism into areas which are precisely new kinds of exploitative functions. And I think one of the mistakes we've made as scholars and activists is saying that this could be treated in the same way as previous forms of capitalist exploitation by dealing with those simple facts of labor exploitation. It's much more than that. Labor exploitation hasn't gone away, but this is something new and different. I think I want to focus just my brief comments here on the future and some questions about the future. There's many critical comments this makes. I could make, there's arguments we could have, and we will. But today, this is a launch, and I'm interested in furthering the discussion and thinking about the future. I'm interested, first of all, in the possibility of real politics. At the end of the remarks just now, Professor Zuboff focused on that issue of how we can reconstruct and rethink politics, or at least democracy. We're living in an age of anti-politics, of a denial that politics is even important anymore. Politics is uncool. Politics is not possible. Politics is vanishing into machines and into corporations. whether we call it platform capitalism or surveillance capitalism, it's a new mode which seems to threaten to efface not only old methods of organization, but old methods of decision-making, including democracy. And at the end of the book, it's a really sad moment, I think, when you get the feeling that the technological constraints imposed by surveillance capitalism might even prevent the possibility of reconstructing politics at all. This is something I've thought about as well. I've called it ambient government. You call it something different, but this is something I really worry about. And how far do we go before it's too late? Many people have thought about this in the past. It's always a concern we have, but I think it's a much realer concern now than it ever has been. In the same way that the kind of critiques that are being made have also been made before in some ways. You know, when I think of the idea of this instrumentarian sort of slavery, it reminds me of the human batteries in the Matrix, or Philip K. Dick's in, kind of worlds of effacement and worlds of deception. But I also worry that we're stuck in some ways in where the solutions are coming from. I'm slightly worried about the fact that nostalgia often seems to provide the answers or the sources of where the answers come from. And I think it's not surprising that we do this. This is our comfort zone. This is our space. We return to home when we're looking for answers. And there's some beautiful writing about this in the book. But I also think this is actually a dangerous place to go. Nostalgia is also the source and the rationale for why we now have a resurgence of authoritarianism in the world. It's that running back to daddy, to tell us everything is safe and it's okay, that we can be protected from those nasty outsiders, that comes from that nostalgic place when everything was good, everything was bright, everything was beautiful. And I think this is a dangerous turn, and we have to think instead about how we build in the future, whatever has existed in the past. I also think there's something of a danger in thinking about us in unproblematic ways. And while it's really great that we can talk about humanity, we've got to recognize that the humanity we're talking of is not a singular public. It's not a singular us. There are people in this world who've experienced the kinds of damage, division, prejudice, destruction, genocide that none of us who are white, middle-class, male people like myself will ever know. And just because now we are all being divided up, and now people like me are starting to experience this kind of oppression, it doesn't mean this is a new oppression. And I think we have to acknowledge and we have to understand that people are coming from different spaces. Different spaces, different spaces, different spaces.
If nature is what we have helped to destroy during the century of industrial capitalism's dominance, is it now human nature that is in the sights of a new surveillance capitalism? Is it human nature that will be disfigured by a new regime of instrumentarian power? Should we not gather in resistance? Should we not gather the resources of our democracies to finally draw a line and not allow this to stand? To finally draw a line and not allow this to finally draw a line and not allow this to finally